And we're back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan, broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is here Jon Gunnarsson, broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer James Huff, making sure everything works just fine, broadcasting from the US. Greetings, gentlemen. Hi there, Jon.
Good evening. A lot of things to cover today, so
Yeah, and, we're even going to talk about holy catrimony, so quite a lot of things to cover today. Yeah. So yeah. Other than that, I'm extremely tired because again I've been live. This will be the third hour I've been live. So yeah, but oh, and the weather sucks. I hope it doesn't suck that bad at your end.
it's mostly fine. It's a bit cold, but the sun has been shining today, so it's fine.
You got sun. That's absolutely fabulous. I haven't seen the sun since Tuesday, and that's annoying. That's annoying as hell. Anyway, since you mentioned the a lot of things to cover, let's start with those.
Okay, the first one is from the Daily Mail from the UK. FGM is only the same as male circumcision, breast implants, and designer vagina ops. Gynecologists argue genital nicks that don't harm girls should be legalized. Milder forms of female genital mutilation should be classified in the same way as male circumcision and breast implants to stop it being demonized, a controversial new report has claimed. Changes to the way female genital mutilation is defined and viewed are needed to protect young women from more serious forms of cutting, a team of experts argued. The gynecologists suggest a small surgical nick, a minimal procedure that compared to male circumcision that slightly changes the look of a young woman's external genitalia, should be legally allowed. In a paper published in the Journal of Medical Ethics, they say mild forms are no worse than cosmetic procedures such as breast implants or designer vaginas Western women pay for. But the experts stress the procedure should not alter the function or the sensory capacity of a young woman's genitalia. They contend this more nuanced approach would uphold cultural and religious traditions without sacrificing the health and well-being of girls and young women. However, their views have met with a raft of conflicting opinions. In a series of editorials published alongside the paper, other leading experts in the field claim there is, quote, no doubt that in whatever form female genital alteration has its origin and purpose in controlling women, and as such should remain illegal. Sometimes referred to as female circumcision, FGM refers to procedures that intentionally alter or cause injury to the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. More than 125 million girls and women alive today have been cut in the 29 countries in Africa and the Middle East where FGM is concentrated. Despite 30 years of campaigning, the practice of cutting women's genitalia continues to flourish in many African countries and within immigrant African communities elsewhere. To date, attempts to stamp it out with legislation have failed, and may instead be driving it underground. The authors Kavita Shah Arora of the Metro Health Medical Center in Cleveland and Alan Jacobs of Case Western Reserve University, also in Cleveland, suggest. Quote, we are not arguing that any procedure on the female genitalia is desirable, they said. Rather, we only argue that certain procedures ought to be tolerated by liberal societies. They suggest that term female genital mutilation, or FGM, be replaced with a less emotive female genital alteration. That, they argue, would reflect the different types of procedure and their associated risks and minimize demonization of important cultural practices. FGM is not an appropriate term to use for the type of procedures they advocate, which are akin to cosmetic dentistry, breast implants, or labiaplasty, for which affluent women pay thousands of dollars, they said. Current categorization covers 4 types of female genital cutting, with type 4 the most invasive and dangerous. But the authors call for a new system of categorization that is based on the effects of the procedure, rather than the process. Category 1 would include procedures that should should have no long-lasting effect on the appearance or function of the genitalia if performed properly. An example would be a small nick in the vulvar skin. Category 2 would include procedures that change the appearance slightly but which are not expected to have any lasting effects on the reproductive capacity or sexual fulfillment. Examples include pulling back the hood of the clitoris and labiaplasty. Categories 3 to 5 would include procedures such as clitoris removal and vaginal cauterization that maim or harm and impair sexual fulfillment, pregnancy, and childbirth. These should be banned, they say. Categories 1 and 2 are no different to male circumcision, which is rarely performed for therapeutic benefit, but which is tolerated in legal and liberal societies, the authors argue. And restricting these categories of FGA is, quote, culturally insensitive and supremacist and discriminatory towards women, they contend. Rather, permitting this compromise would better protect girls and young women from the long-term harms of the more severe forms of female genital cutting, they suggest. In order to better protect female children from the long-term harms of categories 3 and 4 of FGA, we must adopt a more nuanced position and acknowledges that categories 1 and 2 are different in that they are not associated with long-term medical risks, are culturally sensitive, do not discriminate on the basis of gender, and do not violate human rights, they conclude. But in one of a series of commentaries in response to this paper, Professor Ruth Macklin of Albert Einstein College of Medicine, New York, insists that there is no parity between categories 1 and 2 FGA and male circumcision. Quote, that may be true regarding the degrees of harm the procedure causes, but it is not true of the origins or the continued symbolic meaning of FGA as a necessity for being an acceptable woman, she said. There is no doubt that in whatever form FGA has its origins and purpose in controlling women. In another commentary, Brian Earp, a visiting scholar at the Hastings Center Bioethics Research Institute in New York, argues that permitting minimalist FGA would generate a litany of legal, regulatory, medical, and sexual problems, leading to a fiasco. Rather than continuing to tolerate male circumcision and using this as a benchmark for allowing minor forms of FGA, it may instead be time to consider taking a less tolerant stance towards other procedures, he says. Ultimately, I suggest that children of whatever sex or gender should be free from having healthy parts of their most intimate sexual organs either damaged or removed, before they can understand what is at stake in such an intervention and agree to it themselves, he says. In a further commentary, Dr. Arian Shivashi of the Department of Ethics at the University of Sussex says that a minimalist approach to FGA is unlikely to fulfill the intentions of the procedure, to change the aesthetic appearance of female genitalia and to control women's sexual appetites. And she wonders why the authors don't take the opportunity to recommend a more minimalist approach to male circumcision. Rites of passage are important to all of us, but one must not cause irreversible changes to the body of another person without their consent, she writes. Finally, in a linked editorial, Dr. Michael Dunn of the Ethics Center, University of Oxford, points out, the main argument is controversial, but its airing on the pages of the journal has a clear purpose. By subjecting FGM in its many forms to ethical analysis, we will be in a stronger position to develop and tailor interventions that function to prevent indefensible practices of this kind. The evidence suggests that at least 200 million girls and women alive today have been subjected to genital cutting, he says. That was long.
Genius, absolute genius. I don't know if it was intended or not, but it had the effect that I personally agree with, namely to have these people coming out of the woodwork and saying, wait a minute, rather than continue to tolerate all of this, maybe it's time to take a less tolerant stance towards both procedures, namely both male genital mutilation and female genital mutilation. That's good. I mean, these kinds of things weren't being aired at the highest levels of intellectual spaces on bioethics 10 years ago.
Yeah, though I'm not sure if it's really because of this article. I sort of have the feeling that generally the outlook on male circumcision has been getting a lot more, shall we say, tolerant of that procedure.
Rather a lot more intolerant. I mean, let's not forget that the British Medical Association had a vote on stopping supporting male circumcision. They usually have that around once in 15 years. 15 years ago, it was 99% to 1% in favor of supporting it. This time barely passed. It was 52% to 48%. The debate can be found on YouTube. And the arguments were quite heated. It happened last year. So I don't think there's been more tolerance to male genital mutilation today than in the past. It's
Yeah,
actually less.
I misspoke. I meant to say more intolerant towards it. Yeah.
On the other
Uh,
hand, in the US, the medical establishment has been quite silent about it. I mean, the closest to getting slightly more intolerant was the CDC, who at least this time refrained from saying that it's a good thing. They were like, we don't think it's a good thing or a bad thing. Well, it's there, and that's it. Which is, well, a way of dodging the question. In the US, it's still quite popular, astonishingly to me. I mean, I
yeah,
don't know
but
if
getting a lot less so.
yeah, increasingly less so. Yes, there are states where 95% of new born baby boys are not being subjected to this. So yeah, it is getting better. That's absolutely true. But still, I mean, and their argument is, and that's what I don't like about this article. It doesn't differentiate between children and adults, because as far as I'm concerned, adults should be able to do whatever they please with their bodies, no matter how bad I may think they are, uh, how bad I may think their decisions are. I mean, in a way, the authors are correct that some of the what is now classified under FGM are essentially similar to uh, surgeries and the implants and whatnot, for which affluent women pay thousands of dollars. That is true. However, that doesn't mean uh, they should be allowed for children. But for adults, yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, that's a very important distinction. It's not just about whether it's harmful or not. It's about consent, and I mean, if you inflict these kinds of irreversible procedures on small children who cannot meaningfully consent, that's definitely a problem. In the same way that doing that as an adult, if you decided for yourself, that's a very different question.
Yeah, well, let's also remember that this article comes in the Daily Mail in the context in which the United Kingdom already had one failed attempt to ban all sorts of these labiaplasty and whatnot, these surgeries that uh, affluent, adult, independent women want to have on themselves. And I think it was an order of the NHS or something where they tried to ban it entirely, including in private clinics, because because they reclassified it as MGM. So in that context, maybe they were
FGM,
as FGM, sorry. And in that context, I guess to them there is no difference whether it's on children or on adults. But for me, it is a difference. I mean, if adults want to have whatever they want on their autonomous bodies, on their property, essentially, yeah, sure, why not? I don't think I don't think any of them should be. I mean, if you want to cut your own dick or if you want to remove your own clitoris, who am I to say no? Why should the government force people out of doing that? It's their business. On children is the problem, or impressionable people.
Yeah, definitely. Um, one thing I wanted to address is this argument by Professor Ruth Macklin, um, that in whatever form FGA has its origin and purpose in controlling women. I somehow doubt that. I mean, to a
Depends on
certain
the area.
extent, maybe yes, but having this sort of blanket statement about all forms of female genital cutting and so on, that's just not the case. In a lot of areas, it's not so much about controlling women. It's more that it's a rite of passage that for the most part uh, is done by women. I mean, usually the people who do um, this genital cutting on girls are almost always other women,
Yes.
and this sort of standard Western narrative that is all about men controlling women and denying them their sexuality and so on. It's not really the case. It's women doing it to girls, just like male circumcision is usually men doing that to boys.
Yes.
At least in traditional societies. This sort of angle that it's anti-women and so on, and trying to keep women down. It's not really the case, at least not in all cases.
I would argue even not in most
Yeah,
cases.
not in
I mean,
most cases probably.
it's probably the case, I don't know, let's say in Gambia, where they quite literally, I don't remember the word. They, hold on a second, because they also mention it here. Uh, yeah, this vaginal cauterization, which is very common in Gambia. Now, maybe it is there the case. I would argue that is quite definitely the case. However, in Thailand or in Japan, for that matter, where some other forms of female genital cutting are more or less fashionable and more or less, industrialized, performed in hospitals and whatnot, usually at the behest of the grandmothers. Uh, that's not really a case of controlling. And as you said, it's usually a rite of passage performed usually when the girl is 5 or 6. And it is indeed a minimal procedure. I still think that should not be tolerated because a 5-year-old girl cannot know what's at stake. But nevertheless, it's not root in controlling the sexuality of those girls and whatnot. It's just not.
Yeah. Also, I mean, I don't know. I don't know exactly what these kind of category 1 and category 2 things, what exactly they cover, but from the description here, it actually sounds uh, rather less severe than common forms of male circumcision.
Yeah, category 1 of female genital mutilation, according to WHO, really is significantly less severe than what is still routinely performed in US hospitals, for instance. Category 2 of female genital mutilation is essentially quite similar to the most widespread form of male circumcision, yes. Because it essentially addresses the prepuce of girls, so it's pretty much almost identical. Uh, Whether again, this is the part of argument that I don't really enjoy getting into, because I don't think that they have to be equivalent to acknowledge that this is a violation of the individual's bodily autonomy.
Yeah. Also, on this whole issue of controlling people's sexuality and so on, um,
So is the case with
it's
boys.
also sometimes been the motive for male circumcision. For
Absolutely.
example, Mr. Kellogg, the guy with of the cornflakes fame, was one of the primary proponents of introducing circumcision for boys in the U.S. and one of the primary persons to popularize this procedure in the U.S. And he did it because he
Was it
thought
the
that
sinful? It was
masturbation was
masturbation. Yeah.
sinful, and circumcision was a procedure to make that more difficult.
Yes. Yes, but then again, we cannot talk about practices meant to control men's sexuality. Uh, and this is also an issue because, and I hate to say it, but it's true. A significant chunk of Americans really don't. Uh, they really do live in their own separate world. They barely look beside the fence into Canada, let alone in South America or in Europe. They don't usually follow what's going on in other parts of the world. I mean, I've had Americans telling me that there is no such thing as widespread societies where it's widespread, that circumcision is not common at all. And I was like, dude, I found out circumcision exists when I was 20. Uh, so, just saying. I mean, seriously? And a lot of the grassroots support, tacit support, because let's face it, there is outside of the medical establishment, there isn't a vocal support for circumcision, or the one that did exist, it's getting slower and slower. But the tacit support, the grassroots tacit support, usually things like that. It's not particularly informed that there are other ways, and you know that you can actually have a functional society without cutting the genitalia of children. Same
Yeah,
goes
who
with
would have thought?
yeah, who would have thought? Same goes with with very traditional societies where female genital cutting is preferred. Now, except for Japan and Thailand, all the others usually don't know better. There have been many women who have been subjected to female genital cutting, and when they came to Europe, they were like, that was the first time they were finding out that you can actually have a society without cutting the genitalia of little girls. So that's I think information is usually the biggest obstacle, the lack of information. Sorry, and many people genuinely don't know that you can actually survive as a species without these kinds of stupid barbaric procedures. It's really that key. I've come to be convinced by that after countless conversations that I had online and offline with people who simply didn't know better. They were completely convinced. When I told them that uh, from Portugal to the edge of Japan and the entirety of South America, there's less than 2% of men are circumcised, they were like, that can't be true. And I was like, yes, it is true. Most of the planet doesn't do this. They were absolutely convinced that I was joking. I had to pull up a crap ton of evidence for that. They were like, no, it can't be true. It's normal to circumcise boys. No, it's not. Absolutely not. It's absolutely abnormal.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's Muslims, Jews, and Americans who get their boys circumcised for the most part.
Pretty much, pretty much. Although it depends on the Jews. I mean, again, there are the Jews in Denmark, for instance, pretty much have abolished circumcision within their community because they wanted to. Now, there's even in Israel, there's anti-circumcision movements of Jews who say, "Look, we don't actually need this. We really don't." So things can change and are changing slowly. For further reference, I would reference one of my articles. Genital mutilation is dropping, and that's great. I wrote it for AVFM. Things are changing slowly, but and I think indeed the lack of information, is probably the biggest obstacle right now.
Yeah.
Now, admittedly, there are situations where bigotry plays a part. Uh, for instance, with women, it would be in Egypt. There are communities where there's absolute bigotry, and with boys, there would be South Africa. There are even the Guardian covered uh, some of the horrific cases that have been occurring in South Africa, where teenage boys were forcibly captured and forcibly held down and circumcised, and some of them ended up with severe infections uh, or even loss of genitalia entirely because of these botched barbaric procedures inflicted literally in the woods. Now, there are these situations where absolute bigotry plays a part, but for the most part, it's usually people who are simply not informed. They don't know better.
Yeah, and I mean a lot of these cultural practices, when you're sort of part of that society, they just seem obvious and just the thing that is just done. And
Hmm.
it's most people don't really reflect on these kinds of things, and
Hmm.
that in that way, it's very healthy to look outside of your own society, look at other societies, how they do things, and you see that a lot of these things are not immutable or necessary or maybe even beneficial.
Hmm. And I don't like this narrative either of with which this article starts. To protect sensible cultural practices, and not doing so is supremist and chauvinistic. And really, really, then how about let's bring stoning back into Europe and North America, because it's a sensitive cultural practice in rural Iran. Uh, I mean, where do you draw the line? I don't think cultures have rights to begin with. It's an idea. Ideas don't have rights. Why should they be protected?
Yeah, I mean to a certain extent, but I mean, um, let's take a different example. Let's say that that you have a culture that um, that says that say um, men should wear hats, a certain kind of hats, or let's take a realistic example. Let's say that you have Sikhs that according to their religion should wear turbans, and then you have a law that forbids the wearing of turbans. I think that would be culturally insensitive and would be a stupid law and so on.
Well, again, but
Even
again,
if the
where we
law is sort of equally enforced in everyone, and non-Sikhs are also not allowed to wear turbans, I still think that would be a terrible law because wearing
yes,
turbans is not harmful.
yes, but that's what I was about to say. I mean, wearing a turban is not harmful. Cutting the genitalias of children is. Uh, I mean, and also, since when is the government's job to decide how I should dress or how anyone else should dress? You know, even that kind of policy doesn't necessarily have to be countered on a culturally insensitive argument, but rather on a wait a minute, since when it's the politicians in the parliament's job to decide what kind of hat should I wear, whether it's a turban or a hat or whatever. None of your business. Beat it. Now, of course, private businesses can say, look, no turbans in our business, and if you don't like it, don't go there. Because there are businesses that actually have a dress code and things of that nature, and you can say it's culturally insensitive, but I would tolerate it, that kind of thing. But the parliament to pass a law saying you shouldn't be wearing turbans, no, that's retarded because it's not the government's business or the parliament to regulate what people should wear.
Yeah, I mean, it was just an example, but basically their argument is that these Category 1 and Category 2 procedures are not really harmful, so the government has no business regulating these. Now, whether they actually don't whether they're actually harmless, it's a different question. But I,
Now,
I, I believe that the argument as far as it goes is valid. Whether it's sound is a different question.
well, even if they weren't harmful, I would still argue, and again, that's the problem with this article. It doesn't make the distinction between unconsenting children and adults. For adults, I would allow all five categories. I mean, who am I to use the force of the state to prevent a woman from removing her own clitoris if she wants to? I think it's a poor choice on her behalf, but I shouldn't be able to stop her using the force of the law. So whether they're harmful or not is not really that relevant. If it's on adults, okay, go ahead. If you want to do it on your cash, on your time, on your property, on your body, whatever.
I think whether it's harmful is very much relevant because we're talking here about the rights of the parents, and parents have all sorts of rights to their children, things which they can't do to other adults.
Yes,
Like
absolutely.
you can force your child to eat his vegetables, but you can't do that to other adults. And the reason for that is because forcing someone to eat his vegetables is not considered harmful and maybe beneficial. That's why parents are allowed to do that. Um, Parents are even and I think properly allowed to do certain things that have some harm, uh, but the benefits outweigh the harm. For example, they can decide that there that certain forms of surgery should be done on their children, for example, but not all kinds of surgery. Only surgeries where it can reasonably argue that the benefit outweighs the harm. So we allow parents to vaccinate their children, for example,
Hmm.
but we don't allow people to just go and vaccinate other adults because
Yes.
because they have the right to decide that for themselves, but children do not.
Mhm.
So definitely the question is, are these procedures harmful? Do they have any benefit, and so on? That's what has to be weighed.
Yeah, but that should be weighed only in the case of children and not in the case of adults. That's what I.
Yeah, definitely, yes.
I mean, adults should be able to do whatever they please with their bodies. As with the children, the same arguments used in favor of male circumcision. If you go listen to African scholars, traditional scholars who've been studying, they have the same argument essentially for female genital mutilation. They use pretty much similar arguments. It prevents urinary tract infections, things of that nature. I think the entirety of that pseudoscience is bollocks. It just, nah. As Stefan Molyneux said at our last conference in 2014, if you get a urinary tract infection, there is the 21st century. There's that wonderful thing called antibiotics. You don't need 10th century BC procedures to treat urinary tract infections.
Yeah, although I will say that the claims for the medical benefits of FGM are a bit more dubious than the ones in favor of male circumcision. Um,
I said they're similar. I didn't say they're
yeah.
less dubious or more dubious. They're all dubious as far as I'm concerned. Especially the one with STDs. I mean, the studies, quote unquote studies made on that, have been so thoroughly debunked that I'm astounded that they're still being promoted. And they've been thoroughly debunked by the peers of those who made the studies. I mean, it wasn't debunked by activists or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean these benefits are quite. It's I wouldn't necessarily say that they are debunked in the sense that that's definitely not the case, but um, but also it's not, it certainly hasn't been shown that that it that it decreases the risk of sexually transmitted infections and so on.
Yeah, and
Uh,
besides, there is this thing called common sense. I mean, if indeed male genital mutilation would reduce the risk of AIDS, because that was the first claim, then it came STDs in general, then why the United States, where male genital mutilation is far more prevalent than in Europe or China, why do China and Europe have far fewer infections, HIV infections, and AIDS diseases rates than the United States? I mean, and China and Europe are places where male genital mutilation is far more rare. It still happens, but it's very rare.
yeah, I mean it's just I mean the claim was that it reduces risk by I think 60%. Just for the man, it has nothing has no effect on women. Um, I mean the if that is true, it would not necessarily mean that a country with more um, that if you have two countries, one with a high rate of circumcision and one with low rate of circumcision, that you have um, less AIDS in the first country than in the second, because there's lots of factors at play here, and it's just having this one mitigating factor could
Yes, but the claim was very extraordinary. It reduces the risk by 60%, so it should be a significant factor if that would be the case. Because it didn't say that it
yeah
slightly reduces, it was an extraordinary claim by 60%. I mean, sure, there are other factors at play, but if this one alone would reduce the risk by 60%, surely it would appear, even if you do have two countries, even with other factors at play, surely it would record a more obvious correlation, yet the correlation noticeable in reality is exactly the reverse.
Yeah, I don't know if you really have enough data to say that. Just looking at a couple of countries in isolation, that's you can prove or disprove all sorts of things if you just look at a handful of countries. So I don't know if they've done some sort of more careful analysis of that may be the case, but just to say, look at the US and you look at China QED, that doesn't work.
No, or China or Europe. I mean, Europe is a lot more comparable than the US. I mean, there's a similar number of people, more similar cultures than China, and yet the correlation still stands. There's fewer infections per capita HIV infections than in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, but there's a lot of other factors that even if the sort of 60% claim were true, there's still lots of other factors that are much more important than circumcision, like whether people use condoms, for example, because that reduces the risk of infection by over 99% and so on, and or the rate at which people are promiscuous, which of course also greatly affects of how fast sexually transmitted diseases can spread. So that's I don't know if these sort of factors are similar across Europe and the United States, but I would expect even given this sort of dubious claim with 60%, even if that were true, I could still see these differences between the United States and Europe existing due to these other factors.
Okay, let's get to the next controversial ones. Coming from Aftonbladet in Sweden, the liberal youth legalize incest and necrophilia. The Liberal Youth Organization in Stockholm, LUEF, who also pride themselves with their slogan Freedom, Anti-Racism and Feminism, want to make incest and necrophilia legal, so it was decided at its annual meeting. The proposal, presented at the Youth League's annual meeting today, says that siblings over 15 years of age should be legally allowed to have consensual sex with each other. We do not generally think about moral laws, and this law protects no one right now. We are a youth organization, and one of our tasks is to think one step further. I understand that it can be considered unusual and disgusting, but the law cannot assume that it is disgusting, says Cecilia Jönsson, LUF president in Stockholm. Meanwhile, the Youth League made a decision that it should also permit a form of necrophilia. Individuals, essentially, should be allowed to donate their bodies after they're dead for sexual purposes, if they so choose. You should get to decide what happens to your body after you die, and if it happens to be that one wants to donate his body to the museum or for research, or if you want to donate it to someone to sleep with it, then it should be okay, says Cecilia Jönsson. Adam Alfredsson, spokesman of the Liberal Party, says that these proposals are nothing like the positions that the Mother Party endorses. Incest is and should remain illegal. We reject the Liberal Youth Stockholm's proposal. There should be no change in the legislation. And the reporter asks, do you imagine to be legally able to donate your body for necrophilic purposes? We think it will continue to be legal to use a dead man's body in such a way, added Adam Alfredsson. So, hit me. You know what my position is. I made a video about this, so.
Yeah, I watched the video. I guess I'm going to have to defend incest once again on this show.
Yeah, well, as far as I'm concerned, all of that would be fine and dandy if there weren't for these kinds of things that make it everyone else's business. I mean, if out of incest, a genetically degenerate child or children results, it's everyone's business because of socialized healthcare. If it were to be without socialized healthcare, then I'd probably be even more tolerant than I am. Yeah, sure. Adults should be able to do whatever they want with their bodies, no matter how degenerate I may think it is. But since there is such thing as socialized healthcare, probably not.
Yeah, but that argument proves far too much. If we use that same argument, we could also have to say that women above the age of 35 or 40, but before menopause should also be forbidden from having sex because they also have a much higher risk of some sort of congenital disease occurring with their offspring in case they get pregnant. The same for men who are much older. But
In
no
all,
no one is arguing for that.
in all fairness, the doctors do recommend women over the age of 35 or 40 to avoid having children.
Yeah,
They do.
and I'm fully on board on saying to avoid having children, but it's a big difference between doctors saying try to avoid having children and you are legally not allowed to have sex, and if you do, you get thrown in jail.
True, but then again, you know very well that I'm not an egalitarian. I don't think that you should be treated the same because uh, we're not in a perfect world. We live in this world, and in this world, incest is something that triggers a lot of emotions within people. Now, I do agree, however, that globally it is quite a small problem. Around 150, if I remember correctly, because I've done research on this topic to make my video on my channel about this article. 150, 170 children annually are being born disabled. 170 disabled children born out of incestuous relationships annually per on the planet. Now, that number may be a bit artificially low because we have no idea how much incest occurs that we don't even know it happens. But globally, it is a small problem, and probably in Sweden, it is an even smaller problem. I would be surprised if it would be more than 2 or 3 births per year with such problems. Nevertheless, in these kinds of situations, when you're in the democratic system, you're a lot more likely. It is essentially better to just ban it in this fashion. Germany applies the same standard. I mean, they've left alone Patrick Stubnig eventually because he underwent voluntary vasectomy. I don't know if you're aware of the case of Patrick Stubing.
I believe we covered that on the show a while ago. If maybe that's a different case.
No. This is a guy who had 4 children with his sister. Now, they found out that they were siblings after a while because they had been separated at birth. They have entirely different name. Her name is Polish, Kowaleski something, but they're brother and sister.
Yeah,
Uh,
I believe we covered
did
that
we?
case
I don't
for
remember.
like a year ago or something like that, or
It's
maybe half a
probably
year or something like
Probably
that.
the case. I really don't remember. I should probably look into the archive. Nevertheless, I mean, they eventually left him alone because he underwent a voluntary vasectomy, and since then he hasn't been prosecuted. It's been 12 years since then. In 2004, after his third or fourth conviction for incest, he was left alone when he agreed to go to undergo vasectomy. So this is the kind of thing that tends to be allowed uh, in my country. The same thing. An incestuous couple that didn't have children because one of them was infertile. Eventually, the law left them alone. They didn't try to punish them, whilst others who did have children, they were punished. So this kind of standard seems to be in place in multiple places. Well, except France, where they legalized it 200 years ago. But well, France is special. And I don't think I don't think it is a bad idea because it's just something that we culturally do not accept. And just like they don't culturally accept eating beef in India.
Yeah, and I'm also in favor of beef being legal in India. Just because it's a cultural practice doesn't mean that it's a good thing. Uh, because fundamentally, if you use the same kind of logic that's used to justify uh, banning incest, you would also have to ban lots of other things that no one wants to ban. Like you'd have to ban all people with congenital diseases from having sex, for example, because they also have a much higher risk, and much higher risk than just the healthy people having incestuous children. Um, uh, I mean, if you know that you have a congenital disease and you have a child, the risk is much greater than healthy people having an incestuous child, and still uh, sex for these kinds of people is still perfectly legal, and no one wants illegal. I mean, if you want to make that illegal, people are going to say you're a Nazi evil eugenicist, and you want to sterilize these inferior people and so on, and you'd be called a Nazi and so on. But with incest, the risk is actually much smaller. At least if I mean, the thing is, if you know you have a congenital disease, some sort of serious congenital disease in your family, then the risk of incest is much higher. But if there's no such disease in your family, the risk of single generation incest is actually very low.
Yeah,
So
that it is indeed true that the Patrick Steuben case was particularly special because they had 4 children, 3 of them disabled. That's not the norm. The norm is usually the first generation comes out rather healthy. That is true. The only portion I entirely disagree because I don't think the issues are. I don't think all issues are equal. And in reality, it's easier to enforce a ban on incest rather than a ban on all people with all congenital diseases. Uh, that's one thing. And but the only thing I do agree with both you and this article is that uh, rigid enforcement of such laws indeed doesn't protect sometimes people because especially these kinds of cases where siblings meet each other as adults having been separated as babies. That's a documented phenomenon. It's called genetic sexual attraction. These people have no idea that they're committing a crime. They usually find out way into their relationship, sometimes after they've been having children. And these people are in that situation to begin with because they have been abandoned. So they're more like victims rather than criminals. So in that regard, I do agree that a rigid enforcement is not necessarily sound, and it doesn't necessarily protect anyone. In fact, it doesn't protect anyone.
yeah, I mean, but also the thing is that the law in law against incest is not a law against having children. It's against a law against having sex with people who are too closely related to you, or against marrying them. And if the law were, if you have an incestuous child with someone who's too closely related, then there's some sort of penalty. I could maybe see that. That would be, I
That
guess.
would be a compromise with which I would completely agree, because it is true. Two 25-year-olds who happen to be siblings having sex, they don't harm anyone else. I don't think it's a good idea of them having sex, but they don't harm anyone else. When they produce a child, that's when I think they do harm someone else. So that would be the compromise you're talking about. I could probably agree almost entirely. I mean, it is a compromise that makes a lot more sense. It addresses everyone's concerns a little bit better.
But the thing is, which I also brought up last time we talked about this in the show, is that I believe that the reason why incest is illegal has nothing to do with congenital diseases, but simply with the fact that most people find incest disgusting, and
Indeed.
because of this disgust reaction that it is illegal, that people hate it, and then sort of ex post facto they try to come up with some rationalization for why it should be illegal in this sort of enlightened liberal frame where finding things disgusting is not a sufficient reason to ban it, so they come up with this reason, oh, it's think about congenital diseases and so on. But the underlying thing is just disgust, and I think that's just a terrible way of having laws. I mean, there's many things I find disgusting. I think say that chewing gum is disgusting, but it doesn't mean it should be banned. It's just my personal preference against it.
Well, in Singapore, throwing chewing gum on the street is It used to be punishable by death at one moment. Now it's
By death, really?
yeah. Until '99, I think it was abolished because finally everyone realized that it is a completely retarded law to kill people because they threw chewing gum on the street, for crying out loud. They actually had some executions about that. You can Google it. But you know, so there are places where that your preference of chewing gum is the law of the land. Now, admittedly, now they would probably only expel you if you're a foreign citizen, and if you're a citizen of Singapore, I don't know, probably they give you a huge fine, or maybe if you
But at
do.
least in that case, it's not a ban against chewing gum. It's a ban against spitting a chewing gum on the streets,
Well,
which is, I guess, a form of minor vandalism. And that being illegal is maybe not unreasonable. I mean, punishing people with death for that is, of course, unreasonable. But I don't know, maybe a minor fine or something that would not be too unreasonable.
well, there is another place where chewing gum is entirely banned. That would be the Islamic State. Now, I don't know precisely. I think that, as far as I know, they have a ban on any Western habit. So that includes watching the game, listening to music, and I would be entirely surprised if it doesn't include chewing gum. It should probably make sense. And by the way, I also find chewing gum to be quite disgusting. But you're absolutely correct. I would never try to ban it because it's none of my business. Now, if you're trying to make balloons next to me and break them and whatnot, now that I may have a problem with.
Yeah, sort of the analogy would be that is that you have a society of lots of people who share our aversion to chewing gum, and then they decide that chewing gum is outlawed and illegal, and then they come up with a justification that yeah, when people chew gum, they spit it on the streets, and then the street has lots of chewing gum on it, and then they stick it on the tables and so on. That's really harmful to society as a whole, and therefore we just have to ban chewing gum altogether, which is just about as unreasonable as banning incest altogether because of the slightly increased risk of congenital diseases from incest.
All right. Jesus Christ, we spent 52 minutes talking just about the first topic.
So late already. We
Yeah.
have to run.
All right, we defended incest and genital mutilation for adults. Okay, let's get to something less controversial by our standards, very controversial by mainstream standards. Independent.co.uk, UK's leading feminist library facing closure after council says it can no longer afford to subsidize its rent. Can you believe it? Feminists get subsidized rent. One of the UK's leading community spaces dedicated to women's liberation may be forced to close after the council announced it could no longer afford to subsidize its rent. The volunteer-run feminist library, the only dedicated one of its kind in London, has been based in premises owned by Southwark Council in Westminster Bridge Road, South London, for nearly 30 years. Home to one of the most important collections of feminist material in the country, the library contains thousands of books, periodical titles, archives, pamphlets, papers, and posters, and hosts a range of events and exhibitions. While it currently pays £12,000 a year to cover the costs of using the building's services, the council is now proposing to charge another £18,000 in rent on top of this, something the library has said seriously threatens its future. Emma Jennings, spokeswoman for the Feminist Library, told The Independent that it pays a service charge and a peppercorn rent to the council through donations and a small amount of grant funding. She said that since the council announced that the change in December, the library had agreed to pay more for use of the premises, but it has been unwilling to negotiate. Southwark Council has said it can no longer afford to not charge the library rent due to a £47 million slash in government funding. We have been trying hard to increase our funding, Ms. Jennings said. In these times of austerity, frontline services are being hit very hard. We do understand the problems. Everyone is suffering under this government. An online petition to save the Feminist Library from extinction has so far attracted 11,000 signatures, and Ms. Jennings said the library hopes the council will work with us to keep it open as a community space. Now, if those 11,000 signatures would have been £1.50 or £2 in donations, they would have already solved the problem for this year. But then again, anyway, going back to the article, Fiona Coley, a Labour cabinet member of the Southwark Council, said that for the past 7 years, the Feminist Library hasn't paid any rent for its premises. Whilst we recognize and appreciate the work that's been done by the library, we have a very clear duty to ensure our assets are being managed responsibly and that we are being fair to other tenants who are paying open market rent. We have offered the Feminist Library a new lease with rent levels that reflect what other organizations in the building are paying. We have also given the library the time to find alternative premises. At a time when the council's funding from government is being cut by £47 million, we are simply unable to continue to subsidize their rent. Having originally intended to introduce the rent on March 1st, it said that it has extended this to April the 30th. Dr. Laura Schwartz, Associate Professor of Modern British History at the University of Warwick, said the Feminist Library was now the only archive in the capital where an array of feminist publications are accessible to the general public on open shelves. The Feminist Library is a wonderful cultural resource that needs to be defended at all costs. Students have used it for academic research as well as informing themselves about the continued oppression of women in our society and how to fight against it. It also provides one of the few spaces in central London where women and feminist activists can come together to meet and organize for a better world, the greater good. If the Feminist Library is evicted from its current premises, Southwark Council will not only be guilty of cultural vandalism, but also of silencing women, added Dr. Laura Schwartz. I can't believe that it is a Labour politician saying that, look, our responsibility is to manage our assets responsibly. And, we have to be fair to other tenants who are paying open market rent. We already made concessions to them. It's time for them to pay up or just leave the premises and move somewhere else. I can't believe it's a Labour politician saying this. It's almost like Tory talk, which is good. I mean, mind you, the Labour politician in this one is absolutely correct. Why should the taxpayers support your feminist library?
Yeah, but if you don't support them, you're guilty of cultural vandalism.
Fine, I can live
and you're
with that.
silencing women.
Okay, I can live with that. I mean, seriously, I can live with an accusation that I'm a cultural vandalist and a silencer of women. I can definitely light up my next cigarette without giving a second thought to such a serious accusation. I don't care. Yeah, I think it's fundamentally good news. I mean, dear feminists, the economics have caught up with your shenanigans. It's time for you to pay up. You're now independent and empowered and whatnot. So, well, you know what independent and empowered people do? Well, they pay their rent.
Yeah, this is just this sort of ridiculous entitlement attitude that because we've been subsidized in the past, therefore stopping that subsidy means that you're shutting down the library and you're guilty of cultural vandalism and you're silencing women. No, you're not being silenced. But if you want to speak, you better actually support yourself and pay the rent on the buildings you're using. It's not silencing. It's like saying that I don't know, some newspaper is silencing me because it refuses to publish an article that I've written.
Yeah.
No, I mean it's their newspaper. They decide what to do with it, and just like this. City council, it's their building. They decide what to do with it, and if they choose to charge rent for people using that space, that's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's the biggest problem. It's taxpayers' money at the end of the day. Why should the taxpayers be forced to pay for an institution that is essentially an institution based on promoting or documenting or archiving fundamentalist ideological work? Even from a leftist point of view, you cannot argue that it is a public good like a museum, and the Museum of National History. Well, we can somehow argue, even though I would argue even those should be privatized, but I can at least understand the argument of public good. There is something that we all contribute so we can go and look into artifacts from our national history there, whatnot. I don't think it's sound. I think it's better to be privatized, but I can at least understand the argument. But with the feminist library, I don't even understand the argument. Why should the taxpayers be forced to foot the bill for such thing? Also, go ahead.
What do you mean by public good? Are you using that in the economic sense or in some sort of other
In
sense?
the feel-good sense that the politicians use. I mean, if you go to a politician and say we should privatize the National Museum, the first thing a politician say, well, that's a public good. It's for all of us. We all contribute so we can go and look at the artifacts from our history. That's
Yeah,
what.
but I mean,
I know it's a retarded argument. I'm not saying it's a good argument, but I can at least understand where he's coming from.
But exactly the same argument can be made for this feminist museum. Just the question is just whether feminism or natural history is good.
Yeah, well, I think national history is definitely a more important subject for the populace than knowing one particular ideology. Because then again, you can go the other way around. Well, if we are subsidizing a feminist library, then why not a Marxist one? Why not a communist one, a Trotskyist one? For every single branch of left-wing ideology, let's subsidize all of them. And everyone would probably notice that that's completely unfeasible. And then again, nobody says that the feminist library shouldn't exist. It just shouldn't necessarily exist on taxpayers' money in central London or in South London, where it's very expensive. You can move in another part of the city where it's cheaper.
I mean, of course, I understand and agree with the libertarian argument against having such a museum or whatever, or a library. But in terms of the this argument that you termed public good, then that is entirely dependent on whether these things are actually good and true. I mean, if all the feminist claims are actually true, that we live in a deeply patriarchal society and women are oppressed and so on, and feminism can help against that, then yes, it would be a public good in that sense to subsidize a feminist library. So it's not something that can just be decided on the meta level. You actually do have to look at the object level and say that no, feminism is not actually that deserving, and therefore it should not be subsidized.
Well, if we're looking at the election results in Britain, and especially Labour's result, which is the only mainstream political party that genuinely believes that women are systemically oppressed and that feminism is a solution, we can safely argue that society doesn't exactly agree with that. Now, of course, there is the argument that the Tories are also gynocentric, and that's true, but at least the Tories didn't run on the platform of women are oppressed, let's help women, whereas Labour went on with pink vans and they marketed themselves entirely as the party of the oppressed, and the oppressed being women always. So, just looking at that, we can safely say, again, from a mainstream-ish point of view, that the British voters, British taxpayers, pretty much lean much further away from that worldview.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why we have all sorts of museums about history and so on, but not a lot about feminism, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were to have a referendum and you would ask, should the taxpayers fund, I don't know, a museum like Madame Tussauds, for instance? I don't know, is that taxpayer funded? I have no idea.
I don't know either.
There are at least two British people in the in the chat room. Please let us know. Madame Tussauds is funded by the taxpayers or is a private museum? I really don't know. But I would guess that if you were to put it to a referendum, should the taxpayer fund Madame Tussauds, versus, and then another referendum, should the taxpayers fund the feminist library, I think the Madame Tussauds would win and the feminist library wouldn't. And that's just the way I see it.
Yeah, probably.
I mean, even a significant portion of the feminists would say, wait a minute, but why should the taxpayers subsidize us? If we're really that important, we're going to keep, we're going to, fund ourselves. Okay, one British guy says, I don't think Madame Tussauds is taxpayers funded. Okay, great. It's good that it isn't. Uh, so yeah, I mean, I'm glad. I really think it's good news. You know, if you want to be a powerful and independent, well, powerful and independent people pay their rent. So feminists, pay up.
Yeah.
Let's get to the next one.
Okay, this one is from Germany, from the Freie Presse. Why the admittance fee for men at the Kreativmarkt has been doubled. Do women pay twice as much, or do men pay half? The normal price of admission for the Kreativmarkt Davanda is €5, says Thomas Simkowiak, a spokesman for the organizers from Dresden. Since this expedition is all about handicraft and handmade objects, which appeal more to women, the organizers wanted to appeal to men by lowering the admissions fee to €2.50. Men were able to attend 6 Davanda exhibitions in Chemnitz for half the price. Now that's over. At the 7th event this weekend, everyone is equal. Everyone pays €5. Why? Quote, women complained and in some cases hurl abuse at us. Some of them write as they were paying, others later on Facebook. Simkowiak explains. He finds it very curious that things were reversed at his classic car exhibitions. Where women paid half price, everyone was happy and no one complained. In the Davanda case, he received letters of complaint from women's organizations and from the town halls of the cities his trade fair was visiting. In Weimar, even the mayor got personally involved. In his letter, the mayor cited the German general law of equal treatment and demanded an end to this sex discrimination. A well-intentioned gesture was in danger of ending in court, Simkowiak says. The organizers were worried and consulted their in-house lawyer. Even though he didn't think the law had been violated, the organizers still bowed to the pressure. Part of that pressure came from Chemnitz. The Equal Rights Commission had received complaints about the different admissions fees, which they interpreted as discrimination, the city's press office confirmed. The mayor's office knew that they couldn't dictate pricing policies of private trade for organizers, but the women's complaints had been forwarded to him. And if you're wondering what this him refers to, good question. I have no idea. It's entirely unclear in the original article. But men do retain one advantage, the men's parking area, a separate waiting area complete with football table and football magazines. The space is said to be tolerated by the Equal Opportunity Commissioner. Isn't that nice?
Oh yeah, what a big concession. I presume this event was private, isn't it?
Yes.
Then what's the business of the mayor? I mean, uh, again, just like the ladies' nights in clubs, if the club wants to make different pricing for different people, and again, I go one step further. I believe in absolute right to discriminate. If they want to tax, I don't know, Negroes less or whatever, they should be able to do so. Why not? Now, sure, I wouldn't support such a business. I think this uh, sex differentiation in prices, I think it's sketchy, and I wouldn't support such a business. But nonetheless, they should be able to do so.
Yeah, and I mean, this kind of price discrimination is, I think, entirely reasonable. You have some sort of product that appeals mostly to one demographic. Um, having lower prices for another demographic may indeed make sense from an economic point of view. It may uh, because with these sorts of fares, you have very high fixed costs, but the variable cost, the costs per extra visitor, may be very low. I mean, there's some sort of limit. Like if there's too many people at this fair, then you have long waiting times, and this gets too crowded, then you have a problem. But as long as you don't reach that sort of capacity, then an extra visitor is basically almost no cost at all. So in that case, this kind of price discrimination makes a lot of sense. The sort of similar way that, for example, you have price discrimination for, say, cinemas or theaters and so on, where you have your lower prices for children, for students, for the elderly, and so on, because they have these people usually have less money, they have less disposable income. So they're much more sensitive to higher prices. So if you have lower prices, it will increase their demands by a lot more than if than most other people who have more disposable income and don't care that much whether they pay a couple of euros more or less.
Yeah, and what I find it particularly astonishing is that there has been a shitstorm forward. I think that him refers to the mayor. I think, but I could be wrong. But anyway, forwarding complaints, sending complaints to the mayor, putting the mayor involved personally and whatnot. Over what? Over 2.50, €2.50? Really? I live in what officially is the third poorest country in Europe. Now, in reality, it's not really that poor, but anyway, I pay on a pack of cigarettes more than that. So, why should that be a problem? I mean, it's not even something big, such as the differences in pricing in insurance, for instance, where there are more different. Women are charged more for health insurance, whereas men are charged more for driver's insurance. In here, it's not even such a big difference. I mean, really, for 2.50, go full Macintosh on everyone?
Yeah, it's about the principle of the thing. It's not about the €2.50. I mean, it's not only that these women are complaining that the price is too high for them. I mean, they were paying the regular price, it was just the price to men that was discounted. I mean, now when they've won the victory, they still pay €5. It's just that they think it's unfair that men pay less, and that's what they're complaining about. It's not about the €2.50. That's not the issue. It's about fairness and about sex discrimination and so on.
Yeah, well,
Of course, they are entirely hypocritical because when it's the other way around, no one complains.
Yeah, just like the chap with the Polish name has brought up into the article that you wrote, that you read. On some other event of them, they had the reverse with the women paying less in order because that event wasn't so much appealing to women and wanted to encourage women to join more. So in that case, there was no shitstorm.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, let's get to the next one. Oh, Jesus Christ, the next one is, yeah. Go ahead, please.
Okay, next one is from the HuffingtonPost.com. Artificial intelligence might just disrupt know-it-all white men. White male executives, long accustomed to their opinions becoming policy, may have the most to fear from artificial intelligence. Seas of data analyzed by swift cognitive computing could make the gut instincts of the executives who dominate business obsolete, according to the lone woman in a 5-person panel at MIT Technology Conference at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology on Saturday. A lot of business is run by, no offense, smart white men, said Amanda Kaloff, chief executive of the AI-driven marketing from a firm 6 Sense, as she turned to the 4 white men serving on the panel. AI is going to take the ego out of the equation. Male privilege ripples through the tech industry. Less than 6% of venture capitalists who provide startups with the financial lifeblood they need to get off the ground are women. When you consider those on the receiving end of venture capital, the ratio is even worse. Less than 3% of the 6,793 companies that venture funds backed from 2011 to 2013 were headed by a woman, according to a 2014 study from Babson College. I look at them as gods, Kellogg said. They get to decide. Thousands of companies come in and they get to decide. It's all subjective. You like to say you're data-driven, she added, before being interrupted with a quick denial from her co-panelist, venture capitalist John Frankel. But you're not data-driven. Indeed, data shows that women-led businesses may be better bets. A Fortune magazine analysis showed that Fortune 1000 companies with female chief executives delivered better stock market returns than those with male CEOs. Yet only 51 out of Venture 1000 companies are run by women. Business today are run by subjectivity. They're run by the person in the room who has the highest title and the loudest voice, Kalo told the Huffington Post in an interview after the panel. Sadly, these don't always correlate with having the best opinion or the right approach. Still, Kalo said she has adjusted to operating in a man's world, so she may need data to check her subjectivity as much as any man. Over the years, she steeled herself against the self-doubt that can plague women working in male-dominated industries, Kalo said. Because as a woman, I'm told what to do all the time. It might be harder for me to take that data in, she said. In the past, I thought, they know better than me. I should really think about this. Now I can be less likely to listen sometimes.
Wham! Uh, even by Huffington Post standards, this is completely retarded. Yeah, well, aside from the usual racist and sexist bigotry, the background bigotry that we have come now to expect from far left racist rags like the Huffington Post. I mean, other than that, this idea that the AI might just disrupt know-it-all men is know-it-all white men. First of all, most of the people working to create AI are know-it-all white men. So just saying. I mean,
Yeah, also this number of know-it-all Asian men.
yeah, and the rest
But
of them are,
Asians are honorary whites anyway, so
yes, they're
it
honorary.
always sort of depends on what kind of point the social justice people want to make. Sometimes Asians are minorities, sometimes they're just white men.
Yeah,
Depends.
yeah, they're Asians, especially in Britain, and especially if they happen to rape several hundred children, like it happened in Rotherham, then it's Asian gangs. But otherwise, it's they're honorary white men. So yeah, it's really a clusterfuck, but not surprising from a social justice warrior point of view. Um, in all seriousness, what the hell? I mean, what is she even trying to say other than to convey a bigoted, racist, and sexist point of view? Because businesses today are run by subjectivity. Well, businesses have always been run by subjectivity. You try some things and you sometimes fail, you sometimes succeed. That has always been the case since business as an idea exists.
Yeah, I mean, capitalism is basically this sort of great trial and error system uh, where we have trial and error, but also additionally we have this sort of mechanism where uh, people who succeed get rewarded, and in the form of getting more money, which they can then invest, and people who fail have less money that they can invest. And if you let that system run for a while, then um, you have people who usually make good bets, good decisions, get a bigger and bigger share of the market until you have almost only people who actually know what they're doing investing money, and that's is a very great process that yields us a lot of prosperity. And yes, there's a lot of subjectivity involved here, but there isn't any viable alternative currently.
Yes.
Maybe sometimes in the future we will build some sort of great AI that will do things much better than us, and we'll we can leave it to make better business decisions. But currently, that's just not an option, and so we may be stuck with those know-it-all white men at least for quite a while yet.
Yes, and again, there's this dubious claim there that companies with female chief executives delivered better stock market returns. Maybe. On the other hand, considering that there's only 51 in the Fortune 1000, Mm, can you spell small sample? And also, of those 51, there's also HP and Yahoo and things like that that have yielded terrible market returns that they dropped out of the Fortune 1000 in the next year. So,
Also,
go ahead.
also notice that how they're dropping this in. First of all, they're talking about they say that investing in the startups run by women by venture capitalists is a better bet. And then to justify that, they're using this study about Fortune 1000
Which is
companies.
completely
Completely
unrelated.
different thing. One is little tiny startups, and the other thing is big established companies and corporations. Uh,
Yes.
skill in running one is not necessarily the same as skill in running the other. So it's completely unrated stat that's throwing in there probably because they do not have any sort of stat like that for women running these small startups.
Yeah, the
That would
comparison
be my
is like,
guess.
look, our little team from the village in the regional Liga is getting better. I mean, look, that kind of crossing into the 16-yard box is good. Robin used it, and look how Bayern Munich won the UEFA Champions League. It's the same thing here. They're comparing startups with Fortune 1000, which is the difference between a low tier league versus the first division, essentially. Uh, Completely different things. But this article is very good to be read in comparison with the next one, because the next one it's also about white men, because the left has been in a very severe racist and sexist frenzy lately. And the next one is also about white men, and this time just look how the failures of white men are described. Listen to this. The Guardian. Why do white working class boys shun university? It is widely documented that white working class children in the United Kingdom underperform at school and are less likely to attend university. Earlier this month, the government imposed new rules on universities requiring them to work more closely with schools in poorer areas to target underrepresented populations, specifically white working class boys. Much of the rhetoric implies that the low rate of working class participation in post 16 education is due to poverty of aspiration. This is woefully simplistic. Despite the government's insistence that schools become engines of social mobility, we know aspiration is a complex phenomenon. In understanding how working class young people construct their aspirations, we must consider the complex identity work around becoming socially mobile, which is influenced by school, family, and neighborhood. During my time teaching in South London, I became interested in how white working class boys in the United Kingdom's lowest performing ethnic group came to aspire and regard themselves as valuable individuals within a neoliberal expectation of social mobility. Leftist buzzwords intensify. Anyway, I spent a year researching the educational aspirations of 23 white working class boys aged 14 to 16 across 3 London schools to explore how they come to understand themselves as aspirational subjects. These young men, who largely lived in council estates and all qualified for free school meals, were of mixed academic ability. Many of my participants constructed their identities in schools that were largely inadequate in terms of teaching and learning, yet paradoxically were robust in preaching the merits of post 16 qualifications. Attending a university was portrayed as an essential step to long term economic security. Yet the boys' aspirations often involved wanting to do well academically, but not too well. One participant, George, said, quote, I do want to become someone that stands out, but I don't want to at the same time. I want people to see me as a smart person, but I don't want to be like someone who's embarrassing. Another participant, Tom, highlighted the identity work involved in being a good student in a disadvantaged school, along with the importance of peer acceptance. I wouldn't want people to know I'm doing the best, not teachers, obviously, but I wouldn't want them telling everyone I'm the best and rubbing it in their face. I'd like to keep it personal. The boys were attracted to a middling position, neither failing nor succeeding, and being thought of as ordinary by their peers. Yet their schools often promoted an idea of aspiration that was competitive and self-serving. The schools had adopted the learn equals learn mantra intended to motivate students. It often had the opposite effect, however, as it was in direct contrast to the boys' home lives, which were grounded in emotional commitment, social ties, and collective responsibility for the vulnerable. Really? Anyway, one participant, Harry, was in the top sets for most of his subjects and would be the first in his family to attend university. He described his aspirations as, quote, I don't want people to think that I love money. I want them to think I give something back, that it works both ways, that I'm not greedy, end of quote. Many of the boys identified with this egalitarian outlook. Egalitarianism, in this sense, was a desire to fit in a society where everyone has an equal say and no one is better than anyone else. The boys in my study were very aware of social class. When I asked them to examine images associated with elite boarding schools and universities, the majority were fascinated but unsettled by the otherness of these lifestyles. Keeping a bit, many of the boys characterized the middle and upper middle classes as entitled, self-serving, and uncaring. Such views formed their aspirations around higher education, leading them to feel that prestigious institutions could bring about feelings of inferiority. If these young men embrace academic success, they face entry into an unfamiliar and disconcerting world, and so they contend with a double bind, fear of failure and fear of success. The majority of the boys in the study did pursue some form of post-16 education, mostly vocational training, BTACS, or A-levels. Only 2 went to attend university, both at local institutions which were not part of the Russell Group. Some fulfilled their aspirations to settle down and become young fathers. One became a professional footballer, another a bank teller, and several found substantial trade work where they started making considerably more than an NQT teacher salary. So, when there's not enough women, they're being oppressed by the male gaze, or they're being intentionally discriminated. When there's not enough white men in a space, then surely it's because they're shunning it. Let that sink in for a moment. Who's the racist here? And who's the sexist here? So essentially men have agency and they essentially choose, they shun it, but women are so bloody stupid that they must be something external that makes them choose something else. Ouch.
Yeah.
Ouch.
I mean, they're not necessarily wrong. Certainly, there's a lot of a strong element of choice in it, but the same is, of course, true with women.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's what I was trying to say, yes.
Yeah, they're being inconsistent.
Yes, I do think that many, especially these boys, quoted in this guy's study, which I don't know how academically relevant it is, but nevertheless, I mean, I presume the quotes are genuine. They probably did choose not to go to university. It has a lot more to do with their own choice rather than external factors.
Yeah. I especially like this one quote that I want to stand out, but I don't want to. I don't want to stand out. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Do you want to stand out, or do you not want to stand out? I mean, it's
you have to pick one. And well, in all fairness, he says later on that those were the answers within the study, and then later on they did pick one or the other. In a way, it's fair. It's fair at 14, 15 to be a little bit confused and not be entirely sure yet what to do later on. I don't blame them necessarily. Nevertheless, it's interesting to see the Guardian treating this a little bit more seriously, whereas when there's not enough women in STEM, for instance, they don't dare to treat this as seriously as this one. It's always something else. They're being shunned away from STEM women, or young women or girls, whatever. They're being shunned away from STEAM, from science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. Whereas boys do have agency and they just shun higher ed altogether for various reasons. Interesting approach.
Yeah, I mean, but there's of course this just sort of a question of personal preferences and personal decisions. But there's also a cultural aspect here that this article it's sort of alluding to it, but it doesn't explicitly mention it. This sort of attitude of I want it to reasonably well, but I don't want to be standing out. I don't want to I don't want to be seen as greedy and so on. That is definitely a cultural attitude that is quite problematic, if I'm allowed to use that term here. That is definitely something that keeps people down.
Yes,
There's,
but
there's,
then
there's
again,
also,
go ahead. Sorry.
there's also, for example, this sort of attitude in a lot of uh, poorer communities that as soon as as you get some sort of money from some source somewhere, some uh, moderate sum of money, then immediately people start asking you for loans and for favors and so on, and very very quickly the money is gone, and in this sense, the sort of kind of informal wealth redistribution that very much disincentivizes people from being successful, because as soon as you have little bit of money, then you expect to give it away, more or less, and that sort of disincentivizes people from saving,
From
from
investing.
investing the money wisely, and that's definitely a problem that this sort of culture reinforces poverty and
Yes,
um,
it perpetuates a cycle of poverty, absolutely.
yeah,
But then again, this is the Guardian. You wouldn't expect the Guardian to criticize this. I mean, come on. By Guardian standards, these poor white boys are essentially the model. I mean, they're white, so they're the oppressor. So it's good that they're poor. They all believe in egalitarian nonsense, which is exactly what the Guardian promotes. And they also don't want to be seen as greedy, and they also hate unsuccessful people, which is exactly the standard at the Guardian. So you wouldn't expect the Guardian to criticize this, or at least to say that, look, this kind of culture actually is one of the factors, or it could be. Uh, you have to understand the Guardian editorial team in here. They're trying to maintain some sort of consistency.
of course, it's also very taboo among the left to talk about any sort of culture of poverty. If people are
Oh,
poor,
absolutely.
that's it's not because of their choices or because of their cultural practices. It's because of oppressive capitalist systems and uh,
Neoliberal, please, neoliberal.
neoliberalism and austerity and so on.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, surely the government slashing a few £1 million in there shuts down feminist libraries and therefore uh, continues to oppress people. Yeah, austerity is definitely to blame. Oh, wait, it doesn't make sense. Oh, austerity and neoliberal practices is what's always at fault for poverty. Never to question the culture of poor people. Yeah, that's what I never understood about uh, even people who don't consider themselves leftists. They still have this disdain for uh, wealthy or successful people, whereas uh, I never got a job from a poor man. Never. Uh, every time I wanted a job, I found it at a person wealthier than myself. So I actually like rich people. I really do, because I can grow next to a rich person. I cannot grow next to a poor person.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, it depends on how people get rich. I mean, some people get rich doing very immoral things, and uh, but then again, also lots of people become poor doing immoral things, and I don't think there's necessarily some sort of strong connection between a strong correlation between um, level of wealth and how caring you are, how greedy you are, how moral or immoral you are. It's
Yeah, but that's the thing, on the Guardian you see this blanket hatred for rich people, even though most rich people aren't there because of immoral practices. Let's face it, most of them are rich, either inherited or grew themselves to there. And what's even more interesting is that, especially on The Guardian, most of the people writing for The Guardian are rich themselves. I mean, if you take their uh, exclusively their income, let's forget about their general wealth, they're already in the global, maybe not top 1%, but top 2% or top 3%. Because in order to be in top 1%, you have to make over $31,000 or $32,000 per year to be in the global 1%. I think most of them make more than that.
Yeah, I mean, almost all of them probably.
Yeah. So there you go. I mean, that's what I don't understand. I mean, there's nothing more disgusting than a rich social justice warrior. It comes and speaks to me about oppression by the rich people. Well, why don't you start practicing what you preach? Just saying.
Yeah, I mean, um, there's this great line in um, what is it called in Eugen Richter's book? What is it? Pictures of the Socialist Future. This sort of late 19th century book about this dystopian novel about a socialist revolution in Germany. And it describes this sort of idea that that before the revolution, all the socialists thought that with this with the coming of socialism, they would be able to live. They would get the wealth of the people who are slightly richer than them, but in fact, what happened is that the people poorer than them got their wealth, and sort of equalization is almost always downwards. I mean, there's maybe for some of the very poorest people, this sort of equalization is a leg up, but for most people, what will happen is that
Yeah, for the vast majority
that
of people is downwards. Yes.
yeah,
We had a joke back in the days of communism here. What is the meaning? You know, the official propaganda saying that we were building a multilaterally developed socialist society, and the joke was, what does a multilaterally developed socialist society actually means? And the answer is, well, a multilaterally developed socialist society it means that you live better this year than next year. So, there was an expectation of a continuous decline in the standard of living and whatnot. Whereas, since then, since that system has fallen, there has never been a year where things were worse than the previous one. So, just on the sheer experience of it, I don't think there is even a choice. But then again, what this article doesn't, going back straight to this article on The Guardian, and that will probably be the last point, and then we'll get to the silly place. We need 20 minutes for the
very
silly
silly
place.
place.
Yes. What this one doesn't address at all is the systemic discrimination. I mean, look at the British universities. Virtually all of them have these racist and sexist programs that all of them, in their entirety, work completely against white men. I haven't seen this author, or anyone at The Guardian for that matter, trying to address this.
Yeah, and now that working class white boys are falling behind, there's no quotas to lift them up
Yeah, absolutely.
because they're white men. Therefore they're the oppressors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, The Guardian shouldn't be asking just why do white working class boys shun university, but why do universities shun white boys in
Yeah.
general? Because that's a much bigger question that affects not just working class boys. And to be fair, I would even go as far as to ask, what does working class even mean today? Because I sincerely doubt that these kids are from families who work in factories, and what working class used to mean 50 years or 60 years ago, or even more. You know, in a certain extent, capitalism has made us all bourgeois.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, leftists think it's a bad thing, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I like being bourgeois.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to the last one with very, very silly place. Please, Mr. Gunnarsson, go ahead.
This one is from the Mirror. I married my cats after my last relationship ended in heartache, and it's perfect. After a painful breakup, many women believe they'll never find love again. But the 48-year-old web designer Barbarella Buchner, finding another man after a 7-year relationship ended, has been the last thing on her mind because she believes she's found happiness, companionship, and emotional fulfillment with her cats. Incredible as it sounds, Barbarella thinks she's found not one but two soulmates in the form of her male moggies, Spider and Lugosi. Her devotion to them is so strong that 10 years ago she even married them in an online ceremony. They're the loves of my life, she claims. I have no regrets and don't care what people say. Cat-mad Barbarella has always been an animal lover. As a child, I was surrounded by cats, she says. Our family regularly owned at least one or two. They were my favorite animal. At 34, Barbarella finally got a chance to adopt her own cats, and she took the opportunity very seriously. For me, it was like when you know you're having a baby, she says. Before you have a baby or adopt a child, you look on the internet to learn as much as possible and read lots of books. That's what I did before I got my cats. In March 2000, Barbarella adopted two 8-month-old tabby cats from the same litter at an East London animal shelter. It was love at first sight when I laid eyes on my boys, Lugosi and Spider, she recalls. I'll never forget that day. They were rubbing against the cage and purring. I knew I wanted those cats. I could tell the feeling of love was mutual by their purrs and the way they were brushing their little faces against the bars. That was it. They were coming home with me. Barbarella, who now lives in Lanzarote, has had a few long-term relationships with men, but never wanted to marry. She explains, I didn't know if I had it in me to be a wife. Some women are built to clean up after their men, and I'm not like that, but I never minded being my cat's servants. I'm not a submissive person, but I'll do anything for Lugosi and Spider. Barbarella says the cats were a comfort to her after her most serious relationship with a boyfriend of 7 years broke down. Skipping a bit about that relationship, in 2004, Barbarella decided to make their love official and looked into ways to marry her cats. She found a website called marryyourpet.com. The site has a list of rules they expect the human marrying their pets to adhere to, such as you are not allowed to mistreat your pet in any way. At once Barbarella had been approved and had paid a small fee of about £20. She tied the knot with Lugosi and Spider in a quickie online ceremony where she clicked on the words I do. Marrying Lugosi and Spider was something I had to do for myself, she says. Some people may call me a bigamist for marrying two cats, or even call our marriage incest because they're brothers. But I've never been one to care about what other people say or think, especially when it has anything to do with my cats and the unusual relationship I have with them. Obviously, I'm not to have sex with my cats. It's just pure, spiritual, unconditional love on both sides. As simple as that. To celebrate their 3-year anniversary, Barbarella got a tattoo of her two tabbies on her right leg. I wanted something of Lugosi and Spider on my body. If they died, I would never marry another cat. They're my first cats, and no other cat in the future can change that. If a man ever approaches me, I just tell him straight off, sorry, I'm married to my cats. If they think that's odd, I don't care.
I can't believe this is real. Come on, this has to be troll. I encourage people in the chat room to, or the people who will be watching this or listening to this after we end the live stream, to go click on the link and just look at the first picture. One of those poor little kittens looks so bloody frightened, as in, get me out of here, help!
I've got to tell you, we have been predicting that this would be the result of feminism for years.
Yep. Jesus Christ. I don't know even how to comment. It's that I can't, I don't even. Yes. Well, in all fairness, much respect for the guys who made marryyourpet.com. I mean, getting people to give you £20 in order to be able to click on the I do button. That's a very ingenious way of working very little and get some cash for it. Absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, sometimes you can have this sort of ideas where you have to do very little and you still get money for that. Like one of my favorite examples is uh, this guy who sold 1,000,000 pixels for I think $1
Hmm.
a pop, and he had this sort of picture of 1,000 times 1,000 pixels, and he sold one of each of them for $1, and got $1,000,000 for that. Just a curious idea that. This clever idea that no one had done before, and it's just completely useless. But a lot of 1,000,000 people are willing to pay $1 each, and that's all you need.
Yeah, the page still exists. It's called the $1,000,000 homepage.com, and it says that it's sold out. And essentially, some of the logos in there are rather big. Some companies bought bigger logos, others bought just 1 pixel because trolling. But nonetheless, the guy made $1,000,000 out of thin air. Similarly, I know someone who sold rocks, as in pet rocks. So you can get a rock as your pet. It was like $4 a rock or something like that, and he eventually sold the company after he had sold rocks something like $5 million. I mean, he was literally selling rocks that you would find randomly. I mean, there was no process whatsoever. He would just find them and put them up for sale, and there were people who were willing to pay $4 or $5 to get their own pet rock, so you can pet your rock. Ah.
Now, in all seriousness, I don't really have a problem with this woman saying she's married to her cats.
Well,
Um,
neither do I.
she's not hurting anyone by it, and probably she's doing men in her area a favor by taking herself off
Absolutely.
the market.
Absolutely. I mean, I would definitely appreciate a psychotic bitch telling me, no, sorry, I'm married with my cats, buzz off. I would say, okay, thank you, goodbye. That would be my reaction because that's absolutely fine. Be straightforward. So it's absolutely appreciable. Appreciated. Uh, yeah, she probably doesn't harm anyone except for those poor little kittens. I mean, I still can't get that image out of my head. One of the kittens was just so terrified. A poor little kitten. I mean, it's
Yeah,
not.
probably he wasn't terrified of her. Maybe he was scared of the cameraman or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, probably the flash of the camera was the source of the kitten being scared. Uh, Nevertheless, I mean, this justification that, yeah, well, I was always surrounded by cats. Well, so was I. Actually, there has never been a moment in my childhood when I had less than 7 kittens. Even now, where my parents live, they're 11 or 12. We have a very big property, and they hang out outside and whatnot. It's very nice. Uh, Now they kind of lost their use. I mean, after communism had fallen, suddenly, the properties were significantly cleaner, and there was no need for actually having kittens to protect you from dangerous species. But nevertheless, I don't think that's justification. I mean, yeah, I was always surrounded by kittens, so why not marry a kitten? Well, how's that supposed to work? Because that's one of her justifications for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not it's not the reason, but I guess she just wants to express that she always liked cats and whatever.
Yeah. Nevertheless, I mean, it's just completely hilarious. Admittedly, it should not be. illegal. I don't have any problem. As you said, it's very good that she's being honest. But still, to be fair, this is not the first. I mean, this one is the first where there is the personal story published for everyone to read with so many details. But this is not the first time, and what I find it particularly odd is that I have never found a story with a man doing something like this. I'm sure they do exist, but I've never read one. But with women marrying objects or animals, this is not the first by any means. There was um, a woman in France last year marrying her dog. There was a woman in Turkey 2 or 3 years ago marrying a bridge. So, these kinds of things do happen. I don't know if there is any correlation, no, sorry, any causation between the fact that they are women and they're marrying objects or animals.
I mean, I do know that there's a number of men who have I guess, intimate relationship with a sex doll, and treat them as their girlfriends. Not sure if there's any who actually have married them in this sense. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, but that's a sexual relationship. Now I can understand that kind of behavior or deviancy, whatever. I can understand how or why it occurs, but I don't remember reading, and again, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It probably does, but I haven't been made aware of. So please do if anyone is aware of such a story. But I don't remember ever reading a story. Man marries a bridge, or man marries his cats. Man marries his dogs. Man marries a door, and yes, there was a woman in Ukraine who married her door because she loved the door that much. Don't ask me why. It's full Macintosh. Uh, But nevertheless, I don't remember ever reading a story like that with men marrying doors, bridges, kittens, uh, and I suspect that it would be treated significantly in a less funny way. It would be probably far more frowned upon. I mean, I don't think this woman gets multiple hate mail because she quote unquote married her kittens.
yeah, I don't know if she gets any hate mail. I mean, really, what is there to hate? I mean, it's sort of eccentric and strange and so on, but yeah, she's not harming anyone.
Yeah, but I would suspect that if a man would announce that he married his cats, uh, there would probably be someone trying to call the animal police or something like that to say that maybe he's abusing them and things like. I could definitely see that happening because these kinds of eccentricities tend to be viewed far less lighthearted than when women do them.
Yeah, that's true. It's true.
Because we're laughing because it is a funny subject. I mean, come on, you married your kittens on a website paying £20 to some dude in probably Indonesia or something who put up a website allowing you to marry your kittens. It's funny. But if a man were to do that, I don't think generally the culture would treat it as funny. That's one thing. And the second thing is, I'm still wondering, and I don't have an answer for that. Why do men do it less, or if they do it as often as women, why does the press cover it a lot less often?
Yeah, I'm
Personal curiosity. I
genuinely
don't
don't
know.
know.
I don't know the answer either. So yeah, that would be the question homework for everyone listening to this. Please look for stories with men marrying objects or animals. If such stories exist, I'm pretty sure they do exist. I don't claim that whatever I read is the absolute and there's nothing outside of what I read. So if such stories exist, please do provide us links so at least we can start thinking about why first of all, to at least start to think whether men do the same thing to a similar extent as women. If they do, why? If they don't, why? It's very interesting. I mean, on the long run, I'm actually considering studying these kinds of eccentric behaviors because at the moment I suspect that men and women are eccentric in different ways. I could be wrong, but I think uh, when it comes to these kinds of fringe behaviors, men and women won't tend to gravitate towards similar eccentric behaviors. Probably there is a reason we have this stereotype with the feminist and her cats.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think there's a real phenomenon behind this idea of the crazy cat lady.
There is that meme on the internet with a lot of kittens entering into a room. Hello, we've heard that you're 41 and you're still not married. Yeah, all right. We joked a lot, and we had the holy catrimony. Jon defended incest. I defended genital mutilation for adults and the legality of genital mutilation. Come on, we've been extremely controversial for this show, haven't we?
Yeah, and we've actually managed to do it all on time, even though we started out quite slow. The first couple of articles we had a lot of discussion, but I mean there's not a lot to discuss about holy catrimony and these perfect companions.
Perfect. Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The poor little kittens. But then again, I mean, defending incest and genital mutilation takes more time, so that's why we started slowly. Bullshit, we just forgot to look at the clock. Yeah, but, I had to make up something. Yeah, that's all I had to say. I'm pretty sure Jon will have one more thing to say.
Yes, I have one final suggestion, which is to take the red pill.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone. Mr. Huff, please take us out.